She didn't come to therapy because she was sad. Not because something dramatic had happened. Not because her life had fallen apart overnight. From the outside, everything still looked stable. Her work was fine. Her relationships seemed normal. Nothing about her story sounded urgent. And yet, the way she sat in that chair told a completely different story. It wasn't sadness in her eyes. It was weight. The kind of weight you carry for so long that you stop talking about it. The kind of tiredness that doesn't complain anymore. The kind that just stays. She came because she was exhausted. Not the everyday kind of exhaustion people talk about after a long week. Not the type you fix with a weekend off or an extra hour of sleep. This was something deeper. Something quieter. Something that had been slowly building in her body for years without anyone noticing. Even her. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes. Not the kind that disappears after a vacation. Not the kind people understand when you try to explain it. This was the type of tiredness that follows you even after resting. The kind that sits in your muscles before the day even starts. The kind that makes simple routines feel strangely heavy. The kind that makes brushing your teeth feel like climbing a mountain, not because the task is hard, but because your body is already negotiating with the day. Every movement feels like it requires permission. Every step feels like something inside you is quietly asking, "Do we really have to do this again?" Before coming here, she had already tried to understand what was happening. She had gone through the process most people start with: doctors, appointments, tests, careful explanations, long waiting rooms filled with quiet uncertainty. She wanted answers, not dramatic ones, just something that made sense, something that explained why her body felt like it was slowly shutting down. She had done every test: blood work, hormone panels, sleep studies, nutrient checks, follow-up visits, second opinions, more follow-ups. Each appointment came with the same hope. Maybe this time they would find something. Maybe this time there would be a clear reason. Everything came back normal. And at first, that sounded like good news. People around her told her she should feel relieved. They said things like, "Well, at least nothing is wrong." But that sentence started to feel strange, because something clearly didn't feel right inside her body. Normal results didn't explain the heaviness. They didn't explain why getting through the day felt like pushing through thick air. They didn't explain why rest never really felt like rest. And yet she told me, "I feel like my body is shutting down, but no one can find anything wrong." She didn't say it dramatically. She said it slowly, almost carefully, like she had already repeated that sentence many times before, and each time it sounded a little less believable to other people. But to her, it was the most honest description she had. What makes experiences like this difficult is that they live in a strange space, a space between what can be measured and what can only be felt. On paper, everything looked fine. But inside her day-to-day life, nothing felt simple anymore. And that gap between results and reality was starting to exhaust her even more. When people imagine exhaustion, they usually picture someone slowing down, doing less, pulling away from responsibilities. But that wasn't what was happening here. Claire didn't stop. Ever. From the outside, her life looked productive, organized, even impressive. She woke up early, planned her day carefully, answered messages quickly, stayed on top of everything. There was always something happening, saw always a task being completed, always a reason to keep moving. Even when she was resting, she was optimizing. If she went for a walk, she was listening to a podcast. If she sat down, she was organizing something on her phone. If she watched something, it had to be useful, educational, productive. She had learned how to fill every quiet space with purpose, and over time, that started to feel normal. She didn't know how to do nothing, not because she was busy, but because stillness felt uncomfortable. Silence felt unfamiliar, and moments without a goal started to feel strangely wrong. So she kept moving, not always because she wanted to, but because stopping felt more difficult than continuing, because nothing made her uncomfortable. Or at least, that's what it looked like. But the truth was more complicated. It wasn't that nothing bothered her. It was that she had learned to move past discomfort so quickly that she rarely gave herself time to notice it. And when you live like that long enough, your body eventually begins to speak in ways that can't be ignored anymore. The first real shift didn't happen during a dramatic realization. It didn't come from a breakthrough moment or a powerful insight. It happened during something much quieter, something so simple that most people would normally ignore it, a moment that looked ordinary from the outside. But for her, it was the first small crack in a pattern that had been running her life for years. She sat down, not to work, not to plan, just to pause for a moment. But almost immediately, her hand moved toward her phone. Not because there was something urgent, not because someone needed her. It was just habit, the automatic movement of a person who had learned to fill every second with activity. I asked her a simple question. When was the last time you truly rested? At first, the question sounded almost strange in the room. Not complicated, not philosophical, just simple. But sometimes simple questions are the hardest ones to answer, because they force us to slow down long enough to actually look. And slowing down was something she had been avoiding without even realizing it. Not a break between tasks, not lying down while still thinking about tomorrow, not scrolling through something while calling it relaxation, not resting in a way that secretly continues the same cycle of doing. I meant real rest, the kind that doesn't serve a purpose, the kind that doesn't improve anything, the kind that doesn't move you forward in any measurable way. Just a moment where nothing is required from you. A moment where your body doesn't have to prove anything. She didn't answer right away. At first, she gave a small smile, the type of smile people give when they expect to answer quickly. But then something shifted, because as she started thinking about it, she realized the answer wasn't as obvious as she thought. Her eyes moved slightly, like she was searching through memories, through routines, through the days that all started to look the same. Work, movement, productivity, responsibility, and even the moments that looked like rest were still full of activity, still full of quiet pressure to be doing something useful. She thought for a long time, long enough for the silence in the room to become noticeable, long enough for the question to settle somewhere deeper. You could almost see her going through the years in her mind, trying to find a moment where she truly stopped, not paused, stopped. A moment where nothing was expected from her. A moment where she allowed herself to exist without performing. And the longer she searched, the more difficult it became to find that memory. Then she said, "I don't like resting. I feel useless." The word didn't come out quickly. It came slowly, carefully, like she was hearing it clearly for the first time herself. Useless. Not tired. Not bored. Useless. And that word revealed something important, because it showed that rest, in her mind, wasn't neutral. It wasn't recovery. It wasn't safety. It was something else entirely. It felt like failure. It felt like falling behind. It felt like not being enough. And once a person starts to associate stillness with those feelings, rest stops feeling like relief. It starts feeling like a threat. She had never said that sentence out loud before, but once it was there in the room, it explained more than any medical report ever had. Because suddenly, the exhaustion made a different kind of sense. Not physical first, but psychological. The kind that slowly becomes physical over time. The kind that builds quietly until the body begins to respond. This is the moment when the conversation usually changes direction. At first, the focus is always on symptoms, energy levels, sleep quality, physical sensations, medical results. But sometimes, the real story isn't only about the body. Sometimes the body is responding to something much older, something built over many years, something that quietly shaped how a person understands themselves. Fatigue wasn't coming from doing too much. It was coming from never allowing herself to stop proving she deserved to exist. That idea can sound intense when you hear it for the first time. But for her, it didn't feel intense. It felt normal. It felt familiar. Like a rule she had been living by for so long that she stopped noticing it was there. Every task became a form of confirmation. Every finished project meant she was doing okay. Every productive day meant she was still on track. And when those days happened often, it created a sense of stability, a sense of control. But it also created a quiet dependency, because the moment productivity slowed down, a different feeling started to appear. Uncertainty, doubt, a subtle fear that maybe she wasn't doing enough. So she stayed busy. Not always because she wanted to, but because it helped her feel safe. It helped her feel like she belonged. It helped her feel like she had a place in the world. And when a person builds their identity around constant effort, rest can start to feel like losing something important. Rest doesn't give immediate feedback. It doesn't produce results. It doesn't show progress. It doesn't reassure you in the same way productivity does. Instead, rest creates silence. And in silence, the mind sometimes starts asking questions. Questions that busyness has been keeping away for years. Questions like, am I enough if I stop? Do I still matter when I'm not achieving something? Is it okay to exist without constantly proving my value? None of this meant she was doing something wrong. It simply meant she had learned a way of living that made sense at the time. A way of living that helped her succeed, helped her move forward, helped her earn respect and trust from others. But the body eventually notices patterns the mind doesn't question. And when the body realizes it has been running without permission to stop, it sometimes responds in the only language it has: exhaustion. When people hear stories like this, they often expect something dramatic in the past, a moment that clearly explains everything, a painful memory, a difficult environment. But life doesn't always work like that. Not every pattern comes from obvious hardship. Sometimes it grows in places that looked supportive, structured, even encouraging. Why, her childhood wasn't harsh. It wasn't chaotic. There were no big moments that stood out as trauma. Instead, it was calm, organized, predictable. But within that calm structure, There was a strong focus on effort, on improvement, on always doing a little more. It was disciplined. Effort mattered more than anything. Doing your best was important. Finishing what you started was important. Showing commitment was important. And over time, those values became part of how she saw herself. Her father believed deeply in effort. He believed hard work built character. He believed pushing yourself created strength, and he wanted to prepare her for life. So he encouraged her to keep trying, to keep going, to never settle too early. Her father used to say, "If you're not tired, you didn't do enough." At the time, it felt motivating. It sounded like advice about dedication, about ambition, about giving life your full energy. And she believed in that message because it helped her grow. It helped her become capable, confident, independent. She admired him, so she built her identity the same way, through effort, through discipline, through showing that she could handle more. And for many years, it worked. People respected her for it. They trusted her. They relied on her. But slowly, without anyone intending it, a deeper belief started forming underneath all of that effort. A belief that being tired meant being valuable, that pushing past limits meant being worthy, that stopping meant something was missing. And once that belief settles in quietly during childhood, it can follow someone into adulthood without being questioned. Until one day, the body begins to respond in a way that can't be ignored anymore. For a long time, her life looked successful from the outside. She was dependable, organized, consistent, the kind of person others could always count on. But inside her body, something quieter had been building for years. Not suddenly, not dramatically, slowly, almost patiently. Because the body can handle pressure for a long time, longer than most people realize. But it remembers everything. Every moment of pushing past exhaustion. Every time rest was delayed. Every time the signal to stop was ignored. The body cannot stay in permanent performance mode forever, even when the mind believes it should, even when life seems to reward it. Eventually, something changes, not in a dramatic collapse, more like a gradual resistance. Energy starts disappearing earlier in the day. Simple tasks begin to feel heavier. Motivation becomes harder to access. And rest stops working the way it used to. At first, people try to fix it by pushing a little harder, trying new routines, improving sleep, adding supplements, organizing the day more carefully. But sometimes the problem isn't about efficiency. Sometimes the body is asking for something entirely different. At some point, it forces a stop, not loudly, not all at once, but in small ways that become harder to ignore. Fatigue that lingers longer than usual, a sense of heaviness that doesn't disappear. Moments where even simple things feel like too much. And when that happens, it can feel confusing, because nothing obvious seems wrong, not as punishment, as protection. The body isn't trying to sabotage a person's life. It's trying to slow something down that has been moving too fast for too long. It's trying to create a boundary where none existed before. A boundary that the mind never learned how to set. Her exhaustion wasn't weakness. It wasn't failure. It wasn't a lack of motivation. It was a boundary she had never learned to set. And once we started looking at it that way, the conversation changed. Because instead of asking how to fight the fatigue, we started asking what the fatigue was protecting. This is where things became uncomfortable, not dramatically, but quietly uncomfortable. The kind of discomfort that shows up when a person stops doing and suddenly notices how unfamiliar stillness feels. I asked her to try something simple, not a long exercise, not meditation, just 2 minutes of sitting in silence. No phone, no music, no task, just being there. At first, she nodded. It sounded easy. 2 minutes doesn't seem like much time. But once we started, the room changed. The silence felt different, heavier, almost like time had slowed down. I asked her to sit in silence, just 2 minutes. And for the first few seconds, nothing happened. She sat still, breathing normally, looking calm. But inside, something had already started shifting. Because when a person is used to constant movement, silence can feel unfamiliar very quickly. After 30 seconds, she opened her eyes. Panicked. Not dramatically, but enough that you could see the tension in her expression, like something inside her was suddenly alarmed. She looked around the room briefly, almost searching for something to do, something to fix, something to return to. I feel like I'm wasting time. The sentence came out quickly, almost automatically, like a reflex. And the moment she said it, the meaning behind her exhaustion became even clearer. Because what she was feeling in that moment wasn't actually about time. It was about permission. Permission to stop. Permission to not be productive. Permission to exist without proving anything. And that kind of permission can feel unfamiliar when someone has spent years earning their place through effort. And then she heard it. Not an actual voice, but a familiar thought. A rule she had followed for most of her life. A quiet message that had always been there, guiding her decisions, telling her what was acceptable and what wasn't. That wasn't her voice. Not really. It was a rule she had never questioned. A belief that had been there for so long, it started to feel like part of her identity. And in that moment, for the first time, she noticed it clearly. From that point forward, the goal wasn't to remove the fatigue immediately. It wasn't about forcing more energy into her life. It was about something much slower. Learning how to stop. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, in ways that felt safe enough for her body to accept. We didn't treat her fatigue by adding energy. We treated it by teaching safety and stopping. That idea can sound unusual at first, because most people are taught the opposite. When you feel exhausted, you try to push through. You try to fix it quickly. You try to become productive again. But here, the work was different. The work was learning how to exist without constantly moving forward. At first, her body resisted. Stopping felt uncomfortable, almost unnatural. Her mind kept searching for something useful to do, something to improve, something to complete. But slowly, very slowly, those moments began to change. Then, it began to trust stillness. Not completely, not immediately, but little by little. Moments of quiet started feeling less threatening. Walking without tracking distance, sitting without checking the time, looking around without turning it into a task. Small experiences that most people don't notice became important signals to her body. Signals that said, "You don't have to perform right now. You're allowed to pause." The change didn't happen overnight. There was no single moment where everything suddenly felt different. Instead, it happened gradually, in small shifts that became noticeable over time. She began waking up with slightly more ease. Her days didn't feel as heavy, and the quiet pressure to always prove something started loosening its grip. Months later, she told me, "I don't feel like I'm collapsing anymore. I feel like I'm allowed to exist." The difference between those two experiences is subtle but powerful. One feels like constant effort just to stay upright. The other feels like space, like breathing without pressure, like being present without needing to justify it. Some symptoms are not signs of illness. They are signs of a life lived without permission to pause. And once that permission begins to return, the body often responds in ways that are quiet but deeply important. Healing doesn't always mean doing more. It doesn't always mean finding the perfect solution. Sometimes healing begins when a person finally stops fighting the signal their body has been sending. Sometimes it means finally stopping.